Welcome to the Anime Audiophile Podcast. Please like and subscribe for more. Thank you. Kakashi Retsuden, the Sixth Hokage and the Failed Prince. Chapter 3. The hooves hit the rough ochre of the well-trod road from the capital to Nagar at regular intervals. Nanera was silent, his eyes focused on the backs of his hands. He held the reins so tightly they rubbed painfully against his hands, and blood welled up on his palms. "Who hit her?" Nanera muttered. Kakashi looked at him. "Do you think whoever hit the girl is to blame?" He shook his head. Whoever hit her and took the jewel was no doubt also dying of thirst. The fault lay with his own ignorant self in giving the girl the jewel in the first place, and with the palace leaders who had created a situation in which a person would hit a child out of a need for water. To get that water, the Prime Minister and Manari were planning to go to war with the Land of Fire. 50 shinobi would stay in Nagar for 10 days. Nanera would have to start preparing as soon as they returned to the village if he was going to have the rations the Prime Minister requested ready in time. "Kakashi, how much wheat do you think we need to feed 50 shinobi for 10 days? Good question." The number that Kakashi gave was much bigger than anything Nanera had imagined. They stopped for the night at the same village they had along the way and reached Nagar past noon 2 days later. The villagers were just harvesting the wheat they had sown in the winter. It was the men's job to take sides to the tawny stalks. The children then took up great armfuls of the harvest and carried it to their mothers. The mothers sat in a circle in the shade and deftly separated wheat from chaff. The final step of exposing the wheat to the wind to blow off the remaining bits of chaff was, for some reason, the work of unmarried women. "Prince Nanera, you're back, H.M. And you too, Mr. Kakashi. Welcome home," Margot called out in a cheery voice from the ridge in the field. She hoisted her full basket up to tickle the sky and set it on her head, bits of chaff catching in the wind and fluttering down. Nanera loved this sight. It was the day when they gave thanks for the blessings they received from nature and gathered up the year's food. But the majority of the wheat harvested now would be given up to an army for war. "Everyone, listen to me," he called out to the villagers as he climbed up onto the stones piled up to divide the fields. "Nanera, welcome back. How was your sister? Master Kakashi, welcome back from your long journey." The villagers gathered around, sweating, faces covered in dirt, as they brushed away the chaff on their clothes. Nanera looked out at them, his face hard. "You don't have to carry the harvested wheat to the storehouse." Why not?" Samir cocked his head dubiously to one side, a bundle of wheat in his arms. "The Queen's army will soon be coming from the capital," Nanera said. "We were asked to prepare rations for their stay here." The villagers' faces began to cloud over at the ominous sound of the word army. "And how many people would that be?" someone called. Nanera glanced back to look at Kakashi, watching over the proceedings. 50 people. They'll be staying for 10 days or so," Kakashi replied on Nanera's behalf. The villagers were stunned into silence. 50 people was a third of the population of Nagar. To have that many people stay for 10 days was, to put it bluntly, a burden. "The Prime Minister said we have to," Nanera explained, staring at the ground as if to avoid critical eyes. "We have no choice. They're going to war." "War? Where?" Eyes wide as saucers, Margot immediately followed up with more questions. "With whom? Why?" Nanera lowered his eyes even further and said in a vanishingly small voice, "With the Land of Fire. He said they want richer land." The villagers looked at each other. So the Land of Fire really exists. But it's incredibly far away. How will they get there? An army? When did we get an army? There wasn't one during the king's reign. In all of its recorded history, the land of Ridaku had never fought a war. None of the villagers could even imagine what combat with another country would look like. "You said they're going to war seeking water." Does that mean there's not enough water in the capital? Margot asked. Nanera was stuck for a minute. Everything's fine. Nothing's changed, not yet. His voice felt unsteady as it spun this lie. But the water source will dry up in a few years, so the Prime Minister says that we have to get ahead of that and get some other land. Why? Margot persisted. Is the Prime Minister's army so strong they could win against the Land of Fire? Margot, you can't go asking Nanera that. He won't know, one of the villagers said, with no malice. If the Prime Minister's decided to go to war, all we can do is obey his orders. But Margot looked even more worried, but most of the villagers already had some measure of resignation on their faces. We did all the work to harvest this, and now it's going to be taken from us, Samir said dejectedly, staring down at the wheat piled up in his basket. Nanera, are you really reading that? I'm reading it, he responded listlessly and dropped his gaze back to the illustrated guide to mushrooms in the 4 seasons that lay open on the table. He couldn't concentrate at all on the lessons he normally enjoyed so much. It might have been important to learn how to distinguish between mushrooms you can eat and mushrooms that can be medicine, but he had problems more pressing than mushrooms right now. The Queen's army was coming. But he still couldn't figure out what he should do. The Prime Minister said they could get water if they went to war. If that was true, then he should offer the wheat to the coming army and support them however he could. But would this country really become wealthy if he did that? Kakashi said a group of rogue shinobi couldn't win against the ninja of Konoha under the Hokage leadership. If that was true, then starting a war was a mistake. Nanera flopped forward onto the mushroom guide. Everything was all tangled up in his head. Everyone was saying something different. Who on earth was he supposed to believe? What popped up in the back of his mind was the little girl's swollen, reddish-black face. He never wanted to see anything like that again. That much he knew. But what exactly was the right thing to do to keep it from happening again? All I have are problems since you became my tutor. Nanera looked up at Kakashi resentfully. He only meant to complain a little, but once he started, he couldn't stop. His unhappiness just spilled out of him. It was way easier when I didn't know any hard stuff and I could play Hokage with Samir every day. Now because you taught me all this, I understand all kinds of things, and I'm thinking all these things, all the time, just round and round. I suppose you would. Kakashi nodded. Well, that's what it's like to know things. If you want to protect the people around you, your only choice is to become strong. You have to have a spirit strong enough to lead everyone. I'm not the king. I don't need to lead anything. Nanera retorted, as the face of the beaten girl flashed through his mind again. He felt guilty, but his mouth wouldn't stop. I'm not smart like you. I don't know anything. Don't think I can do everything the way you can. In contrast with Nanera's increasingly wild tone, Kakashi was the picture of calm. I'm not as capable as you think I am. If that's how I look to you, it's probably thanks to the fact that I've been blessed with the people around me. And my masters, my colleagues, my students. I honestly don't deserve all the blessings I have. Well, I'm blessed, too, he thought, but the words didn't come out of his mouth. Instead, he slammed the book full of mushrooms shut. Kakashi, what should I do? You have to decide that yourself or it's meaningless. Kakashi only ever said things that weren't truly answers. He was really struggling here, and Kakashi wouldn't help him even a little. If we don't obey my sister and the Prime Minister, I'm sure they'll attack Nagar, he said. But if I obey them and go along with the war, a lot of people will die. But if no one does anything, Kakashi countered, everyone will die because of the water shortage. That was exactly it. I hate all those things. I can't choose. You have other choices. You could stop the Prime Minister's army with force. Don't be ridiculous. Nanera lost his temper and leaped to his feet. It's 50 shinobi. There's no way I could beat them. So everyone should just die? He knew he was just ranting, but he couldn't keep from shouting. He knew in his head that Kakashi hadn't meant it like that, but he still couldn't stop. Emotion welled up from deep inside, and his heart pounded. The fact that Kakashi could sit there so calmly made him even angrier. I'm sure if you act justly, there's a path where no one has to die, his tutor told him. I can't choose it, Nanera said through clenched teeth and flew out of the room. That night, unable to sleep, Kakashi stared at the low ceiling. Not wanting to choose either option, he understood Nanera's feelings painfully well. As the sixth Hokage, he had been presented with options he didn't want to choose many times. He absolutely couldn't say he made the best choice every time. He had no doubt that more than one person hated him so much they would have happily murdered him. When he had paid a courtesy call to the Land of Waves as Hokage, in amongst the crowd welcoming him with cheers, there had been an old lady who spat at him. In tears, she shouted accusingly that her son had been killed by a Konoha ninja. The war might have been over, but so many still lived with wounds that could not heal. In this world, there were people who viewed the Konoha ninja as heroes and those who held deep animosity toward them, and as the sixth Hokage, Kakashi had been a target for both. It was the Hokage who bore the brunt of all these emotions, showered in the respect and contempt of an unknown number of people. As leader, he made a lot of hard decisions. Now was no different. If Nanera knew who Kakashi really was, he would likely reproach him and ask why he wasn't helping in a more direct manner. After all, it wasn't like Kakashi could knock 50 or 100 average ninja flying if he set his mind to it. Plus, if he kept producing water with his jutsu, he could solve the water shortage for as long as strength held up. But there wouldn't be any point in that. The people of this country had to learn how to stand up and walk under their own strength. Give a starving person bread or teach them how to grow wheat. As Hokage, Kakashi had always chosen the latter. Kakashi, are you awake? Nanera's voice came from the other side of the wooden door, and he sat up. When he said he could come in, the boy trudged into the room, looking ill at ease. I want you to listen to something. I've thought about what to do. He began to speak awkwardly, unsure. We can't beat the Land of Fire. But even if we did win the war and take something from the Land of Fire and get rich that way, I think probably no one would be happy. So, I don't want to fight the Land of Fire. I want us to be friends. If you truly do aspire to be like the sixth Hokage. That's what the Prime Minister had said. So Nanera decided to try thinking about what the sixth Hokage would do if he were in Nanera's position. But Kakashi had taught him the answer to that a while ago already. The sixth Hokage wanted coexistence and co-prosperity with the surrounding countries. I want to go with the Prime Minister to the Land of Fire, he said. Instead of taking anything by force, we should ask for support as equals. We'll say we'll pay it back double, for sure. I don't suppose it will go well. Kakashi casually rejected this conclusion that Nanera had struggled to reach as he struck a match. His enthusiasm nipped in the bud, Nanera watched Kakashi light a lamp and scowled. Why not? If you go with him all by yourself, the Prime Minister will no doubt end up cajoling you over to his side during the long trip. And you don't have to go all the way to the Land of Fire. There's a much easier way of communicating. An easier way of communicating? Kakashi pulled out a sheet of parchment and spread it out on the table beneath the lamp. Paper. Huh? He frowned. Friends write each other letters. The Land of Fire is far away. How are you planning to deliver a letter? Kakashi said nothing and looked toward the window. Ray was sitting on the perch outside, hood over his head. Not Ray. Nanera hurriedly spread his hands out and stepped out as if to protect Ray. Why not? A hawk could be in the Land of Fire in 2 days. I can't send him outside the country. He's special. He's the Royal Hawk. Why is he special because he's the Royal Hawk? Kakashi asked. How is he different from other hawks? Nanera gulped, at a loss for words. Kakashi held out one arm toward Ray. The hawk flapped its wings, legs together, and grabbed onto his arm. It wouldn't be the first time he's gone to the land of fire. I found this in the previous king's office. Kakashi set a scroll of paper on the table. Nanera was baffled, wondering when exactly Kakashi had snuck into the off-limits office as he unrolled the scroll. His father's name popped up at the top, written in ink. A letter? Weird shape. Who was it from? He unrolled the page all the way, saw the name of the sender at the end, and his jaw dropped. The 6th Hokage. That was indeed the signature at the end of the letter in masterful brush strokes. It seems that the king corresponded with the 6th Hokage, Kakashi said. Nanera's hands on the scroll began to tremble. He couldn't believe it. It was impossible. There was no way. His father had been corresponding with the 6th Hokage? Kakashi, he cried. The 6th Hokage really exists. Kakashi nodded. The Prime Minister said so too. Nanera's cheeks flushed, and he stroked the spots of ink on the browning paper. So this was the 6th Hokage's handwriting. He shivered, feeling like he was somehow touching a legend. He felt like the slightly loose hand also resembled Kakashi's writing a bit. The letter used lots of difficult characters, and he couldn't read all of them. But there was a spot where Shuigu was written in katakana. Apparently, his father had even talked to the 6th Hokage about the Shuigu. Ray, did you carry letters to the land of fire? Nanera asked, and Ray puffed his chest out proudly, almost like he understood the words. The next morning, Nanera was groaning in front of a piece of parchment spread out on the table. How should he start the letter? Dear 6th Hokage? Master 6th Hokage? Racking his brains, Nanera carefully marked the page with one character after another, the fruit of his studies. His sister and the Prime Minister were planning a war against the land of fire. He wanted to stop them. He thought there would be civil war. When the fighting ended, he wanted to do whatever he could to avoid a situation where the country was torn apart and the people were starving. He wanted support with rations and resources. Once the country was back on its feet, he would absolutely pay it back. He had worked so hard on this text, so he wrestled with whether to sign it with his own name, but in the end, he decided to simply write, a representative of the land of Ridaku. Lord 6th Hokage. He stared at the name of the recipient at the top and felt something warm and fuzzy. What would he do if he got an answer? He'd be in trouble if he didn't, but if he got a reply in the Hokage's own hand, he might die of sheer joy. Maybe it was indecent to be happy about all of this, but that was the truth of how he felt. Which made him feel a bit weird. I can't believe this is what I'm writing about in my first letter to my beloved 6th Hokage, Nanera muttered. Kakashi looked surprised. Did you have other things you wanted to write about? Well, yeah. The truth was, he didn't want to write a letter of entreaty, he wanted to write a fan letter. About how much he liked the 6th Hokage, about how entranced he was by his story, about how much courage it gave him. Even if he had 10 pieces of parchment, he'd never be able to get it all down. Nanera rolled up the finished letter, tied it with grass, and hooked it onto Ray's talons. Okay, Ray. If you meet the 6th Hokage, please say a super huge hello for me. Ray let out a brief screech as if to say he had it under control and then flew out the window. Nanera watched the brown feathers fade in the distance, and then he noticed crooked lines here and there along the spine of the mountain. It couldn't be. He squinted and gasped when he realized what the lines were. Why? It's too soon. The army of the Prime Minister and the Queen was closing in on Nagar. The Prime Minister's army marched through the mountains and was almost upon Nagar on the morning of the second day. The vanguard was the shinobi squad, clad in sober costumes and on nimble feet. They were supposed to be moving in secret, and the fact that they came happily trekking over the mountain in broad daylight was either a strategy to intimidate Nanera and the villagers, or it meant that they didn't think there would be any resistance here right from the start. Either way, their arrival was several weeks earlier than what Nanera had been told. But this was not the only thing that was not what it was promised to. This was no 50 people. Trailing after the shinobi were columns of artillerymen. Masses of cylindrical steel were piled up on the carts that the men took turns pushing. Cannons, Kakashi murmured. A weapon particular to a region between the land of fire and the land of Ridaku. A device for launching at high speed a lead ball from a steel cylinder. It used a powdered mineral called phosphate for the motive force. Because phosphate did extraordinarily poorly in human conditions, cannons weren't used in the 5 great nations. This was the first time Kakashi had ever seen the real thing. The Prime Minister had no doubt brought back the manufacturing method for cannons from his tour abroad. At a glance, the total number of artillerymen closing in on Nagar was about 300. And roughly 40 cannons. Are the shinobi carrying the cannons? Nanera asked Kakashi as he looked down on the plains from the village watchtower. No, judging from their movements, they're not shinobi. I think they're just citizens who have been conscripted. You think they're going to attack the land of fire with those cannons? No, Kakashi shook his head. Even carrying the cannons this far is quite a lot of heavy labor. The Prime Minister must know it's not practical to carry them all the way to the distant land of fire. So then why would they? Most likely to contain Nagar. The furrow in Kakashi's brow grew deeper as he continued. It would be a serious problem if you were to stage a coup d'état while the Queen and the Prime Minister are away. The Prime Minister probably wants to station the cannons in the village together with a commander he has under his thumb. That's just. There was no way Nagar, a village of not even 150 people, had enough stores to be able to provide rations for such a large army. Nanera's expression grew stern and he glared at the advancing army. He's going to ruin us, and keep any rebellion from happening. By the time noon rolled around, the army had arrived at Nagar. They settled onto the plains that stretched out to the west and south of the village and began pitching camp. The Prime Minister leisurely entered Nagar with several shinobi in tow as bodyguards, and from his horse, announced loudly to the assembled villagers, "This is an order from Her Majesty the Queen to the village of Nagar. The Queen's army will be marching to the east. Thus, you will provide rations. Prime Minister, listen to me." Nanera stepped out in front of him. "I'm opposed to this war. I think we can't win, and even if we do, there's no point in it." The villagers were stunned and looked at Nanera as if to say they hadn't heard anything about disobeying the Prime Minister. "You need not worry. Reinforcements will be coming," the Prime Minister replied coolly. "Reinforcements?" Nanera asked. "Did you hire more shinobi?" "They are not shinobi." The Prime Minister turned his gaze toward the north. The mountain ridges kept going, spreading from the north to the east. Nanera was pretty sure an astronomical research institute had been in that area since ancient times. "What do you mean?" he asked, but the Prime Minister ignored him and looked around at the villagers. "Take whatever food stores you have in the village to the encampment. Make sure you bring out all your winter stores as well." He commanded haughtily and left, as if to say his mission there was complete. The villagers stared in silence at the departing Prime Minister. "There'll be nothing left for us to eat." "That's just how it is," Margot encouraged the woman who was on the verge of tears. "We just have to do as he says, and this can end peacefully. If we go up into the mountains, we can still forage wild vegetables out there, and there's also fish to catch." While she was no doubt trying to think positively, Margot's face was strained. Nanera also knew that there was definitely not enough wild vegetables or fish in this region to keep all of the villagers alive. Nanera made up his mind. "We're not giving them the stores." "Yes," he said. "What?" Margot said, stunned. "If this was a necessary fight, I'd support it," he continued. But the Prime Minister just wants to invade. We can't help him do that. So then, what should we do? We stop them. With force. The villagers couldn't grasp what Nanera was saying. We're going to fight? Kakashi asked. Nanera nodded. It would have been a lie to say that he wasn't afraid. But he had written in his letter to the sixth Hokage that he wanted support because he was going to fight. He couldn't exactly renege on those words. Yes. We fight. In that case, I'll help you to the extent that I can. Kakashi clasped his hands together in front of his chest. He locked his fingers into strange shapes 2 or 3 times, almost like he was making shadow animals. And then he slammed a hand against the ground. The earth shook slightly, and Nanera looked around. The next few seconds were a blur. The ground around the village slid toward the sky, kicking up dust, and became a wall the height of a small hill in the blink of an eye. The northeast of Nagar had always been backed by a steep cliff, but now the west and south were encircled by a dirt wall, so that the village was protected 360 degrees by wall and cliff. While the wall was rumbling upward, Nanera saw a shinobi with quick reflexes throw something like a kunai, but it was easily bounced back by the dirt wall. What is? Kakashi? You did this? Nanera looked at the wall, looked at Kakashi, looked at the wall, and looked at Kakashi once more. A powerful defensive dirt wall. It was almost like that thing he'd read about in the book, the sixth Hokage's Earth Style. Mud wall. Kakashi. You can't be, Nanera's voice shook. Kakashi braced himself and turned to face Nanera. You can't really be a ninja like the sixth Hokage? Yes. There was a curious pause. But Kakashi had assented, at any rate, so. Nanera accepted that his tutor was a shinobi and his eyes shone. Wow. You're a ninja. His eyes were suddenly sparkling about 100% more than normal. I'll tell you right now that I'm not going to apologize for hiding who I am, Kakashi said in a totally regular sort of tone as he looked around at the stunned villagers. On the plains, the Prime Minister had flown into a rage and was hurling angry shouts at the dirt wall. Prince Nanera, what is the meaning of this? If you do not take this wall down immediately, this will be seen as insurrection. It is an insurrection, Nanera shouted back from the watchtower. Nagar does not agree with the war. We will not provide rations. While Minari's face lost all its color as she poked her head out of a tent and learned of her brother's rebellion, the Prime Minister chuckled to himself, as though he had found a just cause for attack, and sent a signal to the artillerymen. They moved as one to turn the carts and point the barrels of the cannons at the mud wall. They're really going to attack. Nanera frowned. Kakashi, we're okay, right? Probably. Probably? He watched on tenterhooks as the soldiers loaded the cannons. A spark traveled down the fuse and disappeared inside the barrel. Boom! Fire and thunder jetted from the barrel, and the cannonball shook the earth as it shot forward, hitting the mud wall squarely and exploding violently. The villagers screamed and crouched down, shielding each other from the inevitable damage. But the mud wall didn't give an inch. A puff of dust rose up into the air, and the wall around them remained. Not even a scratch. The Prime Minister looked up bitterly at the mud wall. This wall is an Earth-style technique. One of the younger shinobi stepped forward. Shinobi techniques all have their affinities. That's the best point of attack. The weak point of Earth style is lightning style. The man's right hand crackled with electricity. What's that technique? The Prime Minister asked. Lightning blade. A major jutsu of the land of fire, a secret tradition. People still talk of the sixth Hokage cutting lightning with it. The shinobi smiled confidently and stepped out toward the mud wall. In general, Earth style was seen as weak to lightning style because the many impurities that existed in the earth were good conductors for electricity. Please watch as I smash it with my lightning blade. Watching the shinobi's movements from the watchtower, Nanara panicked. Kakashi. That guy's trouble. He looks like he's going to use a seriously amazing technique. His tutor said nothing. Are you listening to me, Kakashi? It's bad. We're in trouble. Ah, be quiet. Kakashi stared intently at the endpoint of the trajectory that the man's technique would likely follow. He followed his enemy's eyes to its target and concentrated his mind on the point where the attack would likely hit. The man released the jutsu. Crack. Crack. Thunder roared, and the lightning attack hit the wall at the speed of light. The shinobi no doubt thought the wall of earth would crumble to dust when directly hit with lightning style. However, what the? The shinobi that had launched the lightning attack stared at the mud wall, incredulous. The instant the electrical charge reached the wall, it was sucked into the earth and disappeared. The place where his attack should have connected was transparent like crystal. And it was only that spot, almost as though the material had been instantly switched from dirt to glass. While the shinobi blinked in surprise, the see-through area vanished and became dirt once more. What was that? It looked like the wall turned transparent, deflected the electrical attack, and went right back to being dirt. It must be some kind of genjutsu, the shinobi snorted. No need to worry. It takes an enormous amount of chakra to maintain an earth wall this massive. It won't last long. If it's just the one ninja, he'll wear himself down in half a day, and the jutsu will be released. The man had once been a land of fire ninja. He had served during the era of the 6th Hokage, when people were enthusiastically fusing rapidly developed scientific techniques with the shinobi jutsu passed down and honed through the generations. In that world, a certain scientist had espoused a counter to lightning style for earth style. No, that wasn't just a jutsu. It was a completely unworkable idea, utterly impossible to achieve in reality. A jutsu to transform a part of the mud wall into glass. Earth included many of the raw materials for glass. If a ninja were to gather all those glass elements in one spot and rearrange the atomic structure, the mud wall could hypothetically turn to glass in that one area. And because glass was an insulator that did not allow electricity to pass through it, the part that was glass would, in theory, nullify a lightning-style attack. The jutsu had been given the name Earth Style, Earthstone Hero Technique. And the change in the mud wall he'd seen earlier looked to be that very technique. But no, impossible, the man muttered to himself, shaking his head. The Earthstone Hero Technique was a ninjutsu fantasy dreamed up by a brainiac scientist who had no idea about the practice of ninjutsu. It would take an average person years just to train to increase the purity of the glass elements in one spot in the earth. And then to execute it, they'd have to pinpoint the place where the lightning style would strike and make the change happen while maintaining the entire mud wall. On top of that, they would need to return it to its original Earth state after repelling the electrical attack with the Earthstone Hero Technique. A glass wall might be able to defend against lightning-style attacks, but it would easily shatter with a simple physical attack. Earthstone Hero was completely unworkable. The speed, the accuracy. It required such quick and accurate chakra control that it made him dizzy just imagining it. A ninja capable of this kind of trick didn't exist. The man suddenly stopped. Now that he was thinking about it, the former Hokage of the Land of Fire had been widely praised as a master of all 5 styles. If it were him, then maybe. No, there's no way. He shook his head to reject this fanciful thought. The former Hokage was the leading figure in the rapid development of the Land of Fire and in building peace globally. He was a very important person. There was no way he'd stick his nose into a coup d'etat out here in the boonies. That was not Lightning Blade. Kakashi was thoroughly unbothered as he looked down at the Prime Minister and the shinobi walking back to the camp. He didn't particularly care that this shinobi had gone and claimed the name of the technique that had once been his own personal specialty, but the fact was, it had been a fairly simple bit of lightning style. Given that the man had managed to stay alive this long as a rogue shinobi, he must have had some decent skills, but they didn't begin to compare to Kakashi's. Earth-style, Earthstone hero. Kakashi had mastered this jutsu to counter lightning style when a certain scientist proposed it to him some time ago. He hadn't used it in battle in quite a while, but he thought it had still gone pretty well. The technique changed mud into glass and nullified lightning-style attacks, but it couldn't repel very strong hits because the heat would melt the glass. If it had been his student Chidori attacking, he wouldn't have been able to defend against the blow completely. But he had more important things to think about. He looked back at the villagers, who were milling about in confusion. "Nanera, you disobeyed the Prime Minister. And what is this wall?" "It's still not too late. We can apologize and give them the food. We'll be in serious trouble if we disobey the Queen, you know." The color had drained from all of their faces. And now was no wonder. Their small village had suddenly become a stronghold, and they didn't know if the Wall of Earth was there to protect or imprison them. "Ah," Kakashi said. "Okay, please calm down." The villagers fell silent and peered fearfully at him as though they were seeing a demon. "I understand your confusion," he continued. "But would you hear Nanera out at least? I know because I went with him to the capital, but it seems like your country's stuck between a rock and a hard place." "Wait. Aren't you a tutor?" One man looked at Kakashi uneasily. "How come a teacher's using amazing technique like this?" "Yeah," another man agreed. "You might be popular with the women, but I've heard stories about you. You seem pretty shifty. I mean, you came to Negar because the Prime Minister sent you, right? Are you a spy?" That's Nanera started to respond forcefully, but unable to find the right words, he froze with his mouth open. When he thought about it, the man was right. "Master Kakashi, who are you?" Marco asked nervously. "This wall. It's ninjutsu, isn't it?" Kakashi shook his head gently. "I'll explain everything once this fight is over. To put it another way, I won't tell you anything until we're done fighting." "So why can't you tell us?" she asked. "Because if you're tortured and you let my identity slip, it might expose my country to danger." Cowed by this disturbing logic, the villagers fell silent. "Well, anyway, please listen to what Nanera has to say. Come to your conclusions once you have all the information," Kakashi said and turned on his heel. "Where are you going?" Nanera asked anxiously. "It'll be easier for the villagers to talk with each other without an outsider like me around." That Kakashi really was a fishy guy. Nanera felt this keenly after talking with the villagers. He walked around the village, looking for the fishy man in question. To start with, he didn't know the first thing about him. When he asked about anything personal, Kakashi simply dodged the question. Now that he thought about it, he doubted Kakashi had even been sent from the capital. But for some reason, he wanted to trust him. He wanted to follow him. He was sure that when people talked about a great leader, they meant someone like Kakashi. "I talked to everyone. I told them about the capital, all that stuff," he reported when he found Kakashi sitting on a bale of hay, reading a book. "How'd it go?" his tutor asked. "They said they need time to digest it all. We decided to meet again tomorrow morning and talk then." "I can understand why they'd be hesitant," Kakashi said, closing his book. "After the Prime Minister made such a show of how much battle power they have, it's only natural to be afraid of turning on the Queen. It would be great if we had some kind of support." "Support?" Nanera murmured, looking up at the evening sky, where the sun seemed reluctant to sound them. Ray still hadn't come back. The next morning, 40 cannons had been set up around them in a semicircle. All the barrels were pointed squarely at the village, practically commanding them to surrender. Nanera looked down on the encampment at the foot of the village with dark feelings. He could see the crimson gown of the Prime Minister moving through the camp, but he could find no sign of his sister. She was probably locked away in a tent somewhere. The threat of the cannons stirred up a serious fear in the villagers. Nanera talked with them once more in the plaza about their course of action, but even after sleeping on it, the group urging surrender remained the overwhelming majority. Margot in particular refused to fight the Prime Minister. She wanted to be able to return to the capital again one day. That said, it was obvious to all that if they fed an army of people, they'd hit the bottom of their stores in no time flat. They were boxed in on all sides. "What should we do?" Margot said, on the verge of tears. A middle-aged man crossed his arms and sighed. "Whatever else, the fact is that Prime Minister there got a hold of this much power somehow. Isn't that the real issue here? It was the old king who appointed him." Nanera froze. "There's no point in bringing that up now," Margot chided him, but the man didn't stop. "If we take it all the way back, the problem is that the old king was incompetent, Jim? I mean, trusting a man like that, giving him this appointment, utterly idiotic." "Don't you say that about my father," Nanera shouted, unable to stop himself even though he knew this was no time to be making enemies. He felt everyone's eyes settle on him, but he was feeling so many powerful things that he couldn't control himself. For a second, the man was shocked into silence, but then he grinned and shrugged. "Come on, Nanera. Don't get in a stink about it. You can't be mad. It's the truth. You shut your mouth." He leaned forward, ready to grab hold of the man. "Calm down," came Kakashi's voice from above his head. He squirmed as he realized that Kakashi had caught him from behind. "Let go, Kakashi. This man doesn't know the first thing about my father." He was dragged away helplessly out of the plaza. Kakashi tucked Nanera under his arm while the boy shouted to be let go, climbed a hill, and finally set him down with a thump after they had reached the watchtower at the far edge of the village. "My father was not incompetent," Nanera protested forcefully as soon as his feet were on the ground again. "He worked hard for this country his whole life." Kakashi sighed. Anyone would get mad at someone saying bad things about their family. "I get that. But whatever happens, you're a member of the royal family, and you can't go laying hands on a citizen." "The royal family's fake," Nanera spat. "We're no different from anyone else. And it's weird that we get to stand above people just because we're the royal family." "Maybe so," Kakashi said. "But according to that villager back there, your father was a bit subpar as king." "He was not," Nanera shouted, his eyes red. He couldn't believe even Kakashi was saying this. "You never even met him. Don't just go saying stuff. My father wasn't subpar. Everyone respected him. They needed him. No matter how busy he was, he never, ever slacked off. He was always thinking about all of them first. He was a wonderful king." "He was." His voice wobbled. Kakashi looked down at him. "If the previous king was so wonderful, then why didn't you inherit the throne? Didn't you want to be like your father?" "It's not that." Kakashi seemed to be pushing him. He wouldn't wait for Nanera to find the words himself like he usually did. "It's the opposite. I do want to be like him. But I wasn't sure I could be. So you didn't become king?" Nanera took a step back. He wanted to stop talking about this, and yet he couldn't let it go. Kakashi was dredging up all the feelings he'd been pretending not to notice, the not quite quenched embers of a fire charring a wood pile, burning slowly but surely. "You're not king now, but you're trying to persuade everyone to go against the Prime Minister," Kakashi noted. "Why is that?" Why do you want to protect this country? You're not the king or anything. But I'm my father's son." Tears finally spilled out of Nanera's eyes. Even if he couldn't believe in the reality of the royal family, Nanera had grown up proudly watching the king. As his father's son, he wanted to protect the country his father loved. If my sister the queen is about to step off the path, then I want to stop her. I'm sure Dad would think the same thing. What popped into his mind was the face of the girl who had been hit because of him. Ever since he'd seen the people suffering in the capital, his desire to protect this country, the land built up by his ancestors and his father, had only grown stronger. Nenera exhaled, half groaning. I really want to protect this country. But I don't know if I'm good enough. I mean, like, the Hokage isn't chosen by blood, but by actual power. I absolutely get what you're saying. Kakashi crouched down and met Nenera's eyes. Blood can be really annoying. You can't choose it, and you can't change it. But if you can't choose what family you're born into, you need to at least face that family and the blood you inherited if you can. You have this blood. Your only option is to do everything in your power with it. What to do with the things you inherit from your parents? This was a deeply meaningful question when it came to living as a ninja as well. There were special abilities passed down through families in the ninja world, and they were incredibly powerful. The Uchiha blood. The Hyuga Byakugan. And although the Biju-tailed beast chakra wasn't inherited, it fell into a similar category, in the sense that it was a power gain without seeking it. The faces of his students and colleagues popped up in the back of his mind. All of them lived earnestly in the face of these inheritances, sometimes proud, other times fiercely loathing the very thought of them. Just like how a thick-browed training fool faced the fact that he was not blessed with the talent for ninjutsu by building strength through his own efforts. Nenera fell silent and dropped his gaze to the ground. As he watched over him, Kakashi unconsciously touched his left eye. An unusual ability had once been housed in that eye, a present given to him by a dear friend. Once mastered, this eye had unparalleled power, but unfortunately it was an inherited Kekkei Jinkai, and Kakashi's own physical nature made it difficult for him to wield the eye very effectively. Nonetheless, Kakashi had never stopped confronting this ability that ill-suited his body. Your body is not of the tribe this eye belongs to. An Uchiha man said this to him once, a long time ago. And Kakashi knew that full well. But he continued to hone this ability that he couldn't use properly and eventually became so proficient with it that people began to call him Kakashi of the Sharingan. He put in this work because he wanted to see the world with the eye that his dear friend gave him in his final moments, or at least what he thought were his final moments. It was none other than Obito himself who had given Kakashi a will powerful enough to overcome the barrier of blood. What do you think it is that makes a leader, a king a king? Nenera asked slowly, the words dropping from his mouth. I was born with the blood of the royal family. But how can I become like the sixth Hokage when he was chosen to become leader? All you can do is gain recognition through your actions. You have to forge bonds with the people around you, Kakashi said and turned his gaze out the window. Look. He pointed to the distant sky. Ray's coming back. Nenera lifted his face with a gasp. The hawk was there, dark brown wings spread, flying boldly through the air. Ray! Nenera shouted, waving both arms. When he looked up at Ray, the hawk looked the same as any other hawk. And yet Ray was the royal hawk. Not because his parents had been royal hawks, but because he had a bond with the previous king and now with Nenera. The letter Ray brought from the Land of Fire said that they were preparing support in response to Nenera's request. They would help however they could with provisions, medical supplies, and anything else they had to offer. Nenera slowly read one character after the other in the Hokage's letter, very nearly in tears. When he at last came to the name written at the end, his jaw dropped. The seventh Hokage. That was what it said in a very distinctive handwriting. There's a new one, he cried. There was a change in leadership, Kakashi said. Nenera's hand shook. Did he die? Kakashi shrugged. He might have gotten old and retired. Oh, Nenera sighed with relief. I'm sure that's it. The sixth Hokage worked so hard, he should get some time to just relax. He stroked the Hokage's signature on the letter. His real name was also written there, below his title. The 7th Hokage, Uzumaki Naruto. It was a weird name, but he felt a strange light in it. For a while, Nanara simply stared at the Hokage's handwriting, his face beat red. Eventually, however, he was unable to completely contain his excitement, and he ran out into the plaza, clutching the letter. "Everyone! Look at this! A letter from the Hokage." The name of the legendary Hokage had more than enough power to give the villagers a push in the right direction. The 7th Hokage of the Land of Fire had promised support. This gave many villagers the courage to stand up to the Prime Minister. Not all of them, of course. But in the end, a majority of the villagers agreed to fight. The decisive battle would be that night. Loosen his collar as he slid down to the ground and let out a long sigh. He had been using this earth-style technique for over a day and a half now. His power had grown by leaps and bounds compared with the days when he had fought Obito and Madara. This was only natural given that many years had passed, and he had devoted himself to his training during that time. He had lost the Sharingan and could no longer use Lightning Blade, but he had gained many new techniques in their place, and his chakra had also grown orders of magnitude from what it had been back then. Even so, maintaining a mud wall large enough to encircle an entire village and strong enough to resist cannon attacks was totally and utterly exhausting. He wiped away the sweat on his brow, his breathing shallow. Kakashi had about 4 lightning blades worth of chakra left to keep the wall up until the battle that night. Kakashi watched as Nanara ran out toward the plaza with the letter in hand and leaned back against the watchtower. He took his mask off and loosened his collar as he slid down to the ground and let out a long sigh. He had been using this earth-style technique for over a day and a half now. His power had grown by leaps and bounds compared with the days when he had fought Obito and Madara. This was only natural given that many years had passed, and he had devoted himself to his training during that time. He had lost the Sharingan and could no longer use Lightning Blade, but he had gained many new techniques in their place, and his chakra had also grown orders of magnitude from what it had been back then. Even so, maintaining a mud wall large enough to encircle an entire village and strong enough to resist cannon attacks was totally and utterly exhausting. He wiped away the sweat on his brow, his breathing shallow. Kakashi had about 4 lightning blades worth of chakra left to keep the wall up until the battle that night. End of Chapter 3. Thank you for listening. Remember to like and subscribe for lots more.